David Brucey here with another 3-for-All. This is 3 Wolf Hoffmann licks from 2012. And Wolf Hoffmann is the guitarist from the band Excerpt. And he's definitely a pioneering, legendary German rock and hard rock, guitarist. And he's influenced, hundreds, if not thousands of, famous guitarists. And I'm definitely an Excerpt fan. And I'm definitely a fan of classical music. And Wolf has kind of bridged, hard rock and classical music for years. He's been doing it for a long time. And even, in some of the classic, Excerpt, songs and albums, he would kind of stick themes and melodies from, very famous classical pieces. And he's been doing that since the 80s. And then he recently released, a couple solo albums. Classical is one, and Headbanger's Symphony is another. And he's literally doing, like hard rock covers of classical music from Bach and Tchaikovsky, and there's a bunch. And this lesson's going to take a look at some licks from 2012. And he was doing a live solo, and he actually plays some famous, classical pieces. So this will be a really interesting lesson, and there's some really, expressive and melodic, and famous music you can learn at the same time. And one thing that really separates what Wolf is doing with classical and hard rock, and, if you compare that to, say, someone like, Yngwie, they're definitely both tapping into classical music. Yngwie seems to be a little more focused on the technique, coming from Paganini and violinists, whereas Wolf, he seems really focused on the melodies, like these majestic and romantic and these kind of awe-inspiring, pieces. And you can catch him doing everything from In the Hall of the Mountain King to little pieces of, waltzes and, Tchaikovsky, and there's, Bolero by Ravel, and a whole bunch of stuff that he's adapted, from classical into more of a hard rock, distortion with drums. And he's also performed with some symphonies, some symphonic orchestras too, which is really cool. But the first idea from the solo is actually an excerpt from Edvard Greig's Peer Gynt, I believe is how it's pronounced. I used to pronounce it Peer Gynt, and then somebody pointed out I believe it's actually Norwegian, and you don't pronounce it the way it looks. You pronounce it Peer Gynt. But this is a really famous, melody, and you may recognize it. Something like that. And it's loosely based around A harmonic minor. So we're going to be flirting from A minor and then kind of dipping into E7. Just to kind of get that sound. That first little line right there, it dips right into that G sharp, where you kind of get, a little taste of that harmonic minor sound. And then after it kind of cruises down, and there's some dark, tonalities kind of dipping in there. It almost starts to sound like a Dokken riff, kind of. And then he's doing this really interesting string skipped idea. And that's tricky. Especially because you're avoiding the G string, so you really got to be on top of it. You could also hybrid pick it, but he doesn't do it that way. He actually picks through it. And then you're doing... So another, kind of classically influenced melodic line there. Something like that. The next example is actually the next part of the piece, and Wolf plays through that first lick, a couple times, or that first phrase, and then he follows it with this. So it starts with a G sharp diminished, and then you've got this little expressive slide move. And then there's this kind of falling down the stairs, kind of mix of open strings and fretted notes, and it's kind of an awkward riff. So right there, it's implying, almost Phrygian dominant at that point, because you got that F in there. So right there, and then you're jumping over the G string and just grabbing C and B, and then jumping back to the A, and then you're going to jump up to the B string and grab that D note, and then you've got this little 3-note pattern there, and then just come down the D and the A string, and then just end on technically the first chord of Stairway to Heaven, that A minor right there. The next example is probably the most famous, section of music from Peer Gynt, and this is In the Hall of the Mountain King, which you can hear other versions and re-recording, and other adaptations of this melody. And even the group Sabotage, had a version of this that they included in their song In the Hall of the Mountain King. But it starts really slow, and Wolf's using like an octaver and a bunch of distortion, and he's just kind of blasting it. So we're going to do kind of a quieter, version just to demonstrate it. But slowly, it's like this. And that in itself, right there, that's a great, fretboard exercise, or kind of a melodic, challenge for your fret hand. You could use that as a warm-up, or, part of something, just kind of playing around with it. And if you try to use as many fingers on your fret hand as possible, it turns into a really good exercise. And then of course it moves, into another key. It goes a little higher, and then you've got... Wolf, kind of goes back into that first phrase. There's some other, phrases in the actual piece. It kind of moves around a little bit, but he's just playing, an excerpt, like a piece of it, and then he moves on into another, another part of the solo. And you could definitely take that idea and you could move it into other keys too. Kind of experiment with it and maybe turn it into another lick or a phrase. Well, I didn't include a bonus lick with this lesson because it is 3 for all, and I'm gonna stick to just 3 licks, and that's all we're gonna do. Okay, I lied. There is a bonus lick. This is the pivot arpeggio section from Fast as a Shark, and it's those kind of fast, classical sounding, arpeggios that you hear. And this is a pretty early, example. I know, Wolf definitely is influenced by Michael Schenker. And I think he was also influenced by people like Randy Rhoads, and there's some other players too. So you can definitely hear, the Schenker Rhoads kind of influence here. But it looks and sounds like this. And there it's basically D major, and then E minor, and then A major. And then he just comes down D major, but it's in a really, an unusual fingering. And then you do everything again. Alright, that's going to wrap this look at 3 licks from Wolf Hoffmann from 2012, and I definitely had a lot of requests for Wolf and the music of Excerpt, and I had some fun putting this together, revisiting, some classical themes, and I was listening to a lot of Wolf's music, and I'm getting ready to follow this with an Excerpt chord play, so get ready, because there's more, hard rock and German metal on the way. So leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.